Hi, everybody. I hope you're having a great JNUC. My name is Mark Buffington, and I'm a senior consulting engineer at Jamf. In my role, I help different customer workflows with Apple technologies, as well as how we can inform our product and development teams to implement those things and do a lot of enablement. I'm frequently found testing things, sharing on Slack and Jamf Nation as well. So some of you may know me from there. Today, we're going to be looking at managing macOS updates with Jamf Pro. Through the session, we'll go through a few things. Firstly, the elephant in the room, changes in macOS updates. As we all know, with macOS 11 and beyond, the frameworks and the methods of running updates on macOS have fundamentally changed. And there's different approaches that people are going to take to manage macOS updates. Specifically, MDM updates are a different type of method, and we'll take a look behind the curtain of how MDM updates work with macOS and Jamf Pro. And then we'll look at a couple example scenarios from the user experience perspective, as ultimately that end user experience is one of the most important parts of anything that we do when supporting users with their technology. So firstly, what's changed? Lots of different technology stacks that people had used in the past and methods are no longer applicable with macOS Big Sur or later. So a few of those examples, there's no more self-hosted software update servers. So no more deciding what updates will be presented to devices when they check for updates. There's also no standalone software update packages, so no Delta or combo updaters available to deploy when you want to. No longer is it possible to necessarily use the software update framework as a standard catch-all method as well to install any available update via a policy. And a lot of that is largely due to architectural changes, things in Apple Silicon that require a volume owner to authorize a software update. With that volume ownership, that's something that prevents a software update policy from being able to finish that process as well. So when we look at what's replaced that as the methods of updating or managing available updates. Firstly, if you want to defer updates, that's going to be with a configuration profile restriction, deferring updates for up to 90 days. With that, major installers can still be restricted with a Jamf Pro restricted software action, as those are a little bit different than the software update framework on macOS. You can do software update framework updates in a policy if it is Intel. So if you want to have the software update framework handle that restart function, the command that's shown on screen can make that work. Of course, full installers can still be deployed if that's something that you wish for any type of update. And then the biggest one here is that with Apple Silicon, if you are looking to truly enforce an update and have it happen with no authentication, authorization, or passing of a password, MDM updates are required. This is leveraged programmatically by the use of a bootstrap token, which macOS escrows to Jamf Pro. The nice thing about a bootstrap token is that it's really not a process that you as an IT administrator need to manage, but instead it's something that macOS will automatically request it whenever it's required. So there are some challenges with this, as with any challenge that we take on in the world of IT. InfoSec may require that we have an update applied in a certain time frame, both for security and compliance reasons. But yet, we want to consider that user experience, and where those two things meet is going to define really what you choose for running a software update workflow in your organization. Things like deferrals. Do you want options for them? Do you want to streamline end user downtime by downloading the update before triggering an install? Or do you simply just want to alert users periodically so they update when it's convenient and they can't defer anymore? Not everybody chooses MDM updates, and that's okay. Instead, you may choose a different option here. And I'll just go through a few different things that commonly can be used and deployed using Jamf Pro. You might deploy a full installer and use a policy leveraging StartOS install. Again, with something like that, you can curate your triggering user experience. There's a great open source script and some presentations online from Graham Pugh on that with a script called erase install. Note, you do not need to erase with that tool. Another approach, you may direct users to update on their own, leveraging the open source tool called Nudge. This gives the user the control to do the update when it's convenient for them, as they may be busy with other things, yet at the end of the day, they can have the update take place if they want to use their computer effectively. With that, in JNUC 2020, Dan Snelson had a great presentation on using Nudge with Jamf Pro, so check that out if that's of interest to you. And then another method is kind of a hybrid method of notifications, pre-downloading, and ultimately using MDM commands to leverage the final update on machines with a tool called Super. And great news, Jamf Nation, with JNUC 2022, there's a session on that from the creator of it, Kevin White. So check that out if that's of interest to you as well. With all that in mind, if you choose something that's not an MDM for the update, you should still know how MDM updates work. And we should know how we can use them and what the expected experiences are when running software updates on macOS with MDM. So from here on out, the rest of the presentation will focus on those MDM workflows. So let's take a look. The very first thing to note is that unlike other commands you may be familiar with, where it's a single action you tell a device to do, software updates by MDM is truly a workflow. Any interface that you may choose to work with within Jamf Pro is all going to have a common thread of triggering this workflow with some of the things that you may decide from your update choices. So going through what that workflow looks like, there's going to be several commands that are part of every workflow. And you can see them through command history, logging, etc. The first one, schedule OS update scan. This primes the computer to make sure that it looks at Apple's servers and tells what's available to update. 5 minutes later, a scheduled command will run to run an available OS updates check, and the computer will respond with what updates are available to it. Know that this is going to work a little bit differently than what we see in system preferences, where we may just see one update. But if, for example, a machine is 2 minor releases out from the most current version, they're going to report back to MDM both of the minor versions as being available. Then Jamf Pro will send a schedule OS update command to the computer to have the computer schedule and take care of that update. But in that command, that specific version will be determined, as well as the install action, which determines the behavior. And truly working with the right install action for your use case is a very important thing to consider. Apple has great documentation on their platform deployment guides. If you haven't read them recently, check them out. Stay tuned for updates, as they always do when there's new OS versions. But these install actions, they detail great user experience of what that's going to look like when you run them. But just to note which ones are in Jamf Pro, we have download only, which does as the name says. You can have an install later. And macOS Monterey introduced a new user deferrals key that could be used with that, allowing for a number of deferrals. And this is a native macOS way that allows IT to send the command to do the update, alert the user, and if they're not ready to do the install at that point, macOS can schedule that to take place overnight for that machine as well. So that is more Apple's native way of handling that security and user experience balance. And then there's just getting the job done. Install ASAP. We call it in Jamf Pro a download and install. And then one step further, there is an install force restart available through the Jamf Pro API, but this can cause data loss. It's going to work very much the same as install ASAP. However, users won't be prompted to save a file if an application doesn't already autosave for them. So that's something to use with caution, but know that it's there if you need to use it. Let's put these building blocks together and look at how you would actually use this in practice. How would you trigger that update to take place when you want to make those actions occur? Firstly, choose a version. This part's probably the easiest part. If you know you need an update, you're going to know what version that is. You'll also want to know whether that update is major or minor. A minor update being a version that, say, going from macOS 12.5 to macOS 12.5.1, a minor update. If I were going to that same macOS 12 version while starting on a machine running macOS 11, that's considered a major update, and the mechanisms for that are different. So choose your target group when you form an action for MDM updates. Choose that group based on that above knowledge of knowing the perspective of those devices. You'll also then choose your preferred compatible install action based on the installer type, and then start that workflow by sending the commands. As soon as that happens and eventually the schedule OS update command runs on the computer, macOS takes it from there and handles the update process and any requesting of authorization. Looking at those different installer types, I do want to call this out because major upgrades, such as macOS 13 Ventura that's coming out this year, these use a full install assistant installer app that gets downloaded, and the framework when triggering from MDM is going to be different when you run this installer. No need for a password to be entered. If it's Apple Silicon, the macOS will request that bootstrap token, authorize the install before it goes through and restarts. But a very important note here is that a major installer must use the install ASAP, download and install action. None of the other actions are currently compatible on macOS for full installer updates. Minor updates are going to be a bit more straightforward with more options that you have. They are ultimately going to be smaller in size and a similar experience as what you would see when you go into the system preferences pane for software update, downloading just that smaller patch update. Again, no need for a password. Just like any macOS update, you don't need to be a standard or you don't need to be an admin user, rather. Standard users can also have these updates run as well. And of course, use any preferred install action when you're doing a minor update. You can choose which one you want to do. So you're going to find these workflows and options a few different places in Jamf Pro. There's going to be the management commands in a computer inventory record with some options. The most common method is going to be through a mass action command where you choose a target group of some sort or a search and then take action on that target group that you've selected. And then for those inclined to use the API, both the Classic and the Jamf Pro APIs support software update workflows. But note that the Jamf Pro API is more full-featured and is the further developed endpoint in this matter. Let's see what these look like. With management commands, this is going to be a one-click command similar to what you see in an inventory record as shown on the screen here. It's important to note that when you click that, it's going to select the latest non-major update that's available to that computer. We don't want to have accidental upgrades of major OSs when doing a single click, as the other workflows give more intent for those major updates. And you'll see there's just two install actions in this workflow, downloading only or downloading and installing the update. Mass actions gives you more granular functions, and this is where you can choose a target version. You could choose the latest available update. So when the computer runs its update scan, gives the feedback of what updates it sees as available to it, Jamf Pro can select the latest version, the newest version, and choose whether that's a minor or major update as well if you want to opt in to major updates. Or you could choose specific versions, and this is where Jamf Pro looks at Apple's software update feed that they publish, and using that feed, we can show what versions are available when you click a drop-down. And then, of course, select that install action. You can download only, download and allow macOS to install with those deferrals in macOS Monterey or newer, or download and install, that good old install ASAP. Taking a look at how that looks on the devices, I'm sure we all test. We've probably run through some of these things before, but let's see what some of the user experience looks like with native macOS updates. A download and install, really that most effective at getting the job done. It's going to use the ASAP action, and then it's going to enforce the update showing a 60-second timer before the restart. So things will count down, start that restart, and then complete that update afterwards. If you wish to allow users a little bit more control than a 60-second, the install later functionality is something that can also be used. And this is going to provide notifications. Apple has more detail in their deployment guide, so you can read further detail there. But in short, these messages are going to let users know how many deferral instances that they have to acknowledge before macOS will schedule an update to take place overnight. So even though a user may not be using it, the computer can still request that bootstrap token and get the install taken care of that way. So that's that ideal way of doing a native macOS update that defers that user experience. So, in summary, macOS updates continue to evolve as new options come into play, different OS versions and different behaviors, and even future updates that come with macOS Ventura and declarative management may allow for viewing new OS versions and builds near instantly when updates are complete. But at the end of the day, all roads lead to MDM for enforcing updates. And this is something important for all of us to know how it works. Your approach to managing the updates, focus on the user experience. Really, that is my single most bit of advice that I would say. And if that user experience of an MDM update isn't what you want it to be today, that's okay. There are options. We at Jamf are here to help and deploy different ways that you may wish to do it, and lots of great information from the community, as I shared before. And with that, continue to give feedback to Apple with your managed Apple IDs from Apple Seed for IT, and giving that feedback to them, and give that feedback to us here at Jamf. As things are changing with MDM being a greater focus for updates, we want to make more ideal update workflows for everyone here as well. And with that, thanks for joining us. I hope you're having a great JNUC.